As we close out our series, in my opinion, let me start by asking you something. Does your school have cliques? You know, small groups of people who seem to stick together a little bit better than other groups. Those groups of people who bond together based on things that they have in common. See, back in my middle school, we did have cliques. There was the band clique, there was the sports clique, there was even the church kids clique. And while you might get along great and have a ton in common with people in your clique, you might have a lot of strong opinions on people in other cliques. You know, the ones that are different than you. Because here's the truth, we all have opinions about other people. And oftentimes it's easy for us to form opinions or assume we know things to be true about people who are different than us. Sure, we don't know them all that well, but we think that we do. And what we think to be true of people often becomes our opinion of who they are.
Hello there.
What's your name?
My name's Jenny Darren.
Nice to meet you, Jenny. Where are you from?
I'm from the Cotswolds.
Oh, love the Cotswolds. Do you have a day job?
No, I'm retired.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 68.
And Jenny, are you doing this because you think you can win the show?
Absolutely.
That's what it's about.
Of course.
Okay, Jenny, good luck.
Okay, just bear with me, campers.
Oh, and there's more.
Feeling easy, feeling free. Wanna take it on a one-way ride. Don't say nothing, let me be. I got everything on my side. Get no reason, got no right. I'm gonna have me a great time. Going down, party time. All my friends are gonna be there too.
I don't know about you, but I was shocked by that performance. Most of the judges and the people in the audience definitely formed opinions about that contestant before they even showed their talent. And I think that if we're being honest, we all probably formed quite a few judgments about that contestant too. And those judgments formed our opinion about who that person was and what they were and what they weren't capable of. But as we just saw, our first impressions, they don't always give us the bigger picture of who someone truly is. Think about it for just a minute, about the cliques in and around your school. You probably have assumptions or opinions about each and every one of them. Sure, you don't spend as much time with people that are different than you, people who aren't in your clique. But you've still made some pretty big assumptions about people not in your clique, haven't you? Maybe you've thought things like, the rich kids are blank. Or the people on that sports team, they're a little, the smart kids, they fill this role. The cheerleaders or whatever, the band kids are, you could go on. And I bet right now, as I was going through those, you were filling in those blanks with things that are true for people, or at least what you think in your opinion are true about the people in each of the cliques at your school. Even here at church, there's probably some blanks you're filling in about how you think you know about each of the groups of people in our own church. You probably thought things like that kid who always comes to church is blank. those kids from that school are blank. Those kids in the younger grades, they're, Again, we form opinions about these people based on our assumptions. And just like that, our opinions, to us, they become facts. And what's really tricky about our opinions and our assumptions is that they come from all different kinds of places. Maybe you think something about a certain group of people because of a past experience. That you've been bullied by somebody in that group, that somebody said something about you in that group, that they've hurt you in some way, and that becomes how you define everybody in that group. Whatever it was, that experience shaped your opinion. Or maybe for you it's an opinion if there was an assumption. You don't actually know these things to be true. You just assumed they were true. You might just think it was true, and for you that assumption was enough to affect your opinion and change your opinion about that person based on their clique. Or maybe for you, if you were really honest about it, your opinion might be based a little on jealousy or insecurity. That those other people have something that you want or wish that you had, and because you don't, you have negative feelings or opinions about them. Whatever the reason, when it comes to people who are different than us, people who we don't really understand, we let our opinions and judgments affect how we view them. And that's a problem for a whole lot of reasons. For starters, our judgments aren't usually the nicest and most kind things to think about people. We aren't typically describing people that we don't know with words like awesome or cool or fun to be around. Not only does that mean that we're judging or seeing them negatively, it also means that we're probably not giving them the chance in the future. We've already made up our minds. We don't need to get to know them. We don't need to know anything about them. In our minds, we already think we know who they are. But here's what I think that we're missing. When we base our view on someone else on one experience or one opinion or one assumption, then we're missing the whole story. We aren't seeing them as a whole person. There's a story in the Bible that I think can really help the way that we view those around us. It's found in one of my favorite books, the book of John, which is one of the Gospels that tells the story about Jesus' life, his death, and his resurrection. John was one of the 12 guys that Jesus considered to be his closest friends. His clique, if you would. John was the innermost part of Jesus' circle of friends that we call the disciples. And what John did is he wrote down what he actually saw, what he heard, and what he experienced as a follower of Jesus. And that's where we're going to begin today. So when we pick up our story, Jesus was teaching to a group of people when several religious leaders interrupted him with this question. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" Basically, these religious leaders come to Jesus with a question about a woman who was caught sleeping with somebody who was not her husband. The religious leaders knew the rules. They understood what the law said, and the law said that if somebody committed adultery, they'd be stoned, which basically means people would throw stones at them until they died. Terrible way to go. But these religious leaders thought that they knew exactly what Jesus was going to say about this. They thought they knew exactly how Jesus was going to feel about this woman based on what they understood to be the law. They were so sure that they interrupted one of his teachings to get this answer. And they knew the answer was not only going to prove that they were right about who this woman was, but it was going to show how much better they were than the woman was. Now, we can all admit that, like the religious leaders, we have a tendency to think about ourselves better than we do other people. We tend to see what other people do or who they are much differently than the way that we see ourselves. And because of that, we put space between us and them. We let our opinions and our judgments define who they are, and we slowly move ourselves away from them. That's certainly what these religious leaders thought that they were going to be doing to this woman. And I think that's exactly what they thought Jesus was going to do as well. But instead, Jesus did something I don't think anybody expected. The religious leaders kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down and wrote in the dust. Jesus challenged these religious leaders to look inward at themselves and at their own sin instead of judging other people. Jesus told them that the one who hadn't sinned, the one that was able to look back on their life and say, "Yep, lived a perfectly righteous life," knocked that one out of the park. That person, the person who'd done no wrong, they'd be the one who had the right to throw that first stone. And as you can imagine, nobody but Jesus in that crowd fit into that category. And so while they were standing there, the religious leaders felt convicted. They felt convicted so badly about their own lives and their own sins that their argument just kind of shut down completely. And what happened is that one by one they began to leave. And John writes that after they heard what Jesus had said and after they slipped away, Jesus was soon left standing there with just him and the woman. And this is what happened next. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." While the religious leaders had judged this woman by only one thing that they knew to be true about the woman, Jesus saw something else entirely. Jesus saw a woman that was much, much more than just the one mistake that she'd made, more than just a bad decision. She was so much more than just one opinion, one judgment, one experience. Jesus knew the whole story and he loved her so much, it didn't matter what she'd done. Nobody in this story was really who everybody thought they were going to be. Everybody judged the woman by what she did as bad. But Jesus showed us that she was worthy of forgiveness and a future. And everybody who had thought that the religious leaders were good or perfect or holy or righteous, Jesus showed that they were no better than the woman that they'd come to stone. Because the truth is, we're all made in the image of God. We're all called God's children. And that alone makes us worthy of God's love and forgiveness. This is the way that Jesus saw people. And this is the way that he calls us to see them as well. Jesus wants us to remember that there's more to others than just our opinions of them. You see, reducing somebody to one judgment or opinion causes you to miss so much. The band kids at school, they're probably a whole lot funnier than you think they are. The cheerleaders that you see in the cafeteria that you've just assumed are mean or nasty or judgmental, they might be some of the nicest people in your grade. The people that are in your small group that are at church every week, the people that you probably think are holy, or the kids that you think are perfect, they probably struggle with the exact same stuff that you do. And you never know it because you wrote them off as perfect. See, we miss out on so much by simply boiling people down to one judgment, one assumption, one opinion. So my challenge to you today is to remember this. There's more to others than just our opinions of them. To help you remember this, I want you to try these two things this week. One, worry about yourself. When you find yourself about to form an opinion or make a judgment about somebody else, worry about yourself instead. Just as Jesus reminded those religious leaders, we've got our own mistakes and missteps to worry about. So instead of focusing on someone else's behavior or interest or choices that you just don't seem to understand, focus on yourself, about what you're doing and how you can live a better life with the one that God's given you. The other thing I would encourage you to do this week is remove the judgment. Think about who in your world that you've written off, that you've judged, that you've formed an opinion about without really getting to know them. What if instead of judging them with what you think you know about them, you let the facts define them? What if you were to only focus on what you know to be true about them? Now, while you may not know much more about the people outside of your own group or the group of people right away, you do know this for sure. They're a child of God as well. They've been made in His image and they're deserving of God's love, so start there. Then instead of making assumptions, think about them with the same compassion, love, kindness, and grace that Jesus thinks about them and the way that Jesus thinks about you. Remember, there's more to others than just our opinions of them. As we meet for small groups tonight, one question I want you to be thinking about is this. What's one way that I form opinions about people who are different than me? And we'll see you tonight.